52 years ago in the Andes Mountains of South America, something unbelievable happened. A plane crashed into a mountain, and then it disappeared. This is the story of Flight 571, a flight that performed a real-life miracle. It's a story of survival against all odds. The Andes Mountains are known for their extreme height and harsh conditions. With peaks rising up to 15,000 feet, it's a place where nothing survives. On this day, a plane crashed into the mountains. It was a flight from Montevideo, Uruguay, heading to Santiago, Chile. The plane was carrying 40 passengers, including rugby players, and 5 crew members. The crash happened quickly. The plane disappeared from radar and no wreckage or bodies were found. The authorities thought no one had survived. They searched for days but found nothing. Eventually, they gave up, and the search was called off. People started to forget about the crash, but 2.5 months later, something amazing happened. 72 days after the crash, authorities received a message from the missing plane. It was a miracle. The plane that had crashed in the Andes Mountains was Uruguay Air Force Flight 571. It was still alive in the history books for its incredible survival story. Flight 571 took off on October 12, 1972 from Montevideo. It was headed to Santiago, Chile. There were 40 passengers, including the rugby players, and 5 crew members. But just after takeoff, the weather got worse. The plane had to land in Mendoza, Argentina. The pilot made this decision because the Andes stood like a wall between Argentina and Chile. The mountains were very dangerous, especially in bad weather. The plan was to wait in Mendoza for a day, hoping the weather would improve. Then the plane could safely cross the Andes. On October 13, 1972, Flight 571 took off again from Mendoza. The distance from Mendoza to Santiago was only 180 kilometers, but the Andes Mountains were right in the middle. The flight path took the plane south of Mendoza, then up in altitude to cross the mountains. The pilot, who had done this route many times, felt confident. As the plane climbed higher, the pilot noticed a thick layer of clouds below. He used the radio to stay in contact with the control tower in Santiago. The co-pilot used a method called dead reckoning to estimate their location. When they got close to the Planchon Pass, the pilot turned the plane. But as they crossed the Andes, something went wrong. The pilot thought they were near Curacao, Chile, but in fact they were still far from there. The control tower in Santiago couldn't see the plane on their radar, so the pilot thought they were close to Curacao and asked for permission to descend. The control tower gave permission, unaware that the plane was still too far away. The pilot made a turn and started to descend. But then, disaster struck. The pilot suddenly saw a large mountain right in front of them. The plane didn't have enough time to climb higher, and the tail of the plane crashed into the mountain. The plane broke apart. 12 passengers died instantly, especially those in the back of the plane. The rest of the passengers survived but were badly injured. The temperature outside was minus 30 degrees Celsius, and they were stuck in the snow at 11,500 feet. All they could see was snow-covered mountains. The crash was reported, but the authorities didn't know where the plane had crashed. They searched for several days. Planes flew over the area, but the snow made it hard to spot anything. The survivors tried to signal for help, but the planes didn't see them. The search lasted for 3 days, and then it was called off. The survivors were now thought to be dead. On the 11th day after the crash, the survivors found a radio in the cockpit. They heard the news that the search had ended. This news crushed their last hope. The survivors were already suffering from hunger, cold, and injuries. In the first week, 5 people died. There was no food left. The survivors used the plane's parts to make shelter and protect themselves from the cold. They used plastic visors, seat cushions, and other materials to stay warm. They had only a few chocolate bars, some jam, and dry fruits to eat. But these things quickly ran out. With no food left, the survivors were forced to make a painful decision. They started to eat the bodies of their dead friends in order to survive. This was the only way they could stay alive. 17 days after the crash, an avalanche hit the survivors' shelter. 9 more people were killed. The remaining survivors dug through the snow and managed to create a small space to breathe. But things only got worse. By December 12, 1972, only 3 survivors were still alive. They knew they had to do something. They decided to climb a nearby mountain in hopes of finding help. The 3 survivors, Parado, Kanisa, and Vigen, began the tough climb. The temperature was freezing, and they had no proper climbing gear. They wrapped themselves in sleeping bags and seat cushions and started their journey up the mountain. After 3 days, they reached the top. But what they saw on the other side was more snow-covered mountains. There was no sign of life. 2 of them continued, while the third one returned to the crash site. The remaining 2, Parado and Kanisa, continued their journey. For the next 10 days, they walked in search of help. They traveled 61 kilometers through harsh conditions. Finally, they reached a valley with water and green plants. They saw a man on a horse across the river. Unable to speak to him over the noise of the river, Parado and Kanisa wrote a message on paper and threw it across. The man took the message to the authorities. The Chilean authorities couldn't believe that the survivors were still alive after 72 days. They immediately sent helicopters to rescue the remaining survivors. On December 27, 1972, the helicopters reached the crash site. The pilots were amazed at what they saw. The survivors had climbed a mountain without proper gear, but thanks to their courage and determination, they had made it. All the survivors were rescued, and the bodies of the dead passengers were buried. A memorial was built at the site, made of stones. It serves as a reminder that even in the hardest times, hope and courage can help us survive. This story of Flight 571 teaches us a powerful lesson. Never give up, no matter how difficult things get. If you keep going, even in the worst situations, you can overcome anything. The survivors of Flight 571 proved this with their strength and courage.